Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Commonwealth Heritage Forum lecture series. This evening, we're very fortunate to be able to have Professor Emeritus Sir Henry Fraser talk to us about the Gardens of Paradise past and present in Barbados. I was lucky a few years ago to be in Barbados and to attend a conference which he arranged through setting out the Caribbean National Trusts. And I know the organisation has continued to develop its international links across the region to this day. It was a great pleasure to see him then, and also a couple of years later in Trinidad, there was a follow-up session as well for that too. So his commitment to heritage to conservation is long-standing, though his eminence has arisen through his former medical career as the Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences. So he is a true polymath and probably knows everything about everything that there is to be known in Barbados as a whole. So I will let him now proceed to share that knowledge with us on the particular topic of the gardens. And we very much look forward to learning a lot more about the development of them within the Paradise Island of Barbados. For those who've joined in the last few moments, I'll repeat what's been said already, which is that any of you who may have questions, please to type them into the chat box, and I'll review those at the end of the talk, and we will share the questions at that point at the end. There are closed captions enabled, which can be accessed through the live transcript CC button at the bottom of your screen. You may find you get the best view through clicking top right hand, there's a view button, and you can get side by side with the speaker. And lastly, of course, please would everyone keep their microphones off so that anyone who has a dog growling in the background or a washing machine or anything else isn't sharing it with everybody else. So without more ado, I shall stop. And we look forward, Sir Henry, to hearing your talk.
Well, thank you very much. Let me begin by welcoming you to Barbados, which I often describe as Barbados, the paradise with everything. And that includes the Gardens of Paradise. So my talk is Barbados, the Gardens of Paradise, past and present. Now, what I am going to begin with is one of my favorite verses. And it's a poem, The Lord God Planted a Garden by Dorothy Gurney. And it goes, the kiss of the sun for pardon, the song of the birds for mirth. One is nearer God's heart in a garden than anywhere else on earth. Now, this has spiritual meaning, but gardens are also good for mental health. And a lot of research has recently been done to demonstrate this. Professor Hall from the Texas A&M University, and I'm quoting him, said, interacting with nature increases self-esteem, reduces anger, lifts depression, improves psychological well-being, emotions, and so on. And that gardening can have exactly the same effects on improving our mood and lifting depression. Now, for those who don't know Barbados, those who've not been fortunate enough to come to our paradise in the Caribbean, Barbados is in the bottom right-hand corner, right opposite the Bahamas, Cuba, and the Cayman Islands. It's the most easterly of the necklace of Caribbean islands. So all you have to do is to get on a sailing boat in Europe or off Europe, and the trade winds will bring you into Barbados. This is what has happened so frequently over the last 400 years. Now, I want to begin with gardens which were mentioned by Sir Robert Schomburgk. Sir Robert Schomburgk was a historian. Can I remove that icon bar at the top of my screen, please, Rachel? How do I move that?
Sorry, so you've got the slide that says Codrington College at the top.
Yes, right. Well, there's a line above that in many of my slides. So if I can remove my icons from the top, that would be nice. But Codrington College was the first of the gardens that Schomburgk described in his famous tome of 1848. He was a German-born geographer and historian who came to Barbados and wrote a big book about Barbados. And he said on visiting the college that the stream there is always running and is a principal feature, a delightful spot, a pretty garden with curious trees. And if it's desirable to establish a collection of curious plants, then Codrington College is where they could have a botanical garden, and the stream would help greatly. So this is Codrington College with the avenue of 200 yards of cabbage palm trees, 100 feet tall, and it's a magnificent avenue of cabbage palms, which are really the landmark of Barbados landscape. And here is the avenue looking in the other direction towards the college buildings with palm trees and the bridge over the stream. Here is the ornamental lake fed by the stream, and there's a huge silk cotton tree on the left of the picture and another one on the right with the college buildings behind. The silk cotton or Kapok feature very strongly in Barbadian plant history. Here is the palm garden.
Henry, sorry,
Yes?
just speak up slightly louder.
Okay.
Okay.
Here is the palm garden at Codrington. And there are some 200 palms in the palm garden around the front and the rear of the building. And the palm garden was a very prominent feature of the Codrington College gardens. Here you're looking north towards the Atlantic Ocean across the lawns, golden palms in front, cabbage palms and royal palms behind. Moving to Christchurch, Schomburg described the property of Mr. Piers, which he said was famed in former times for the best gardens in the island, with orange walks and citrus groves and fountains, and all the lovely and pleasant flowers and plants of that delicious country, he said. And this is the avenue of cabbage palm trees leading into the Staple Grove Great House, the plantation house that is now occupied by one of our prominent attorneys. And then you mentioned Government House itself. Now, James Anthony Froude was a popular and somewhat controversial English writer and historian who came out to the Caribbean on a tour of the English dependencies in the Caribbean. And he published a book called English in the West Indies in 1888. And he described Government House gardens with great cabbage palms, cannonball trees, mahogany trees, and wholly new acquaintances. He says there was a grotto with climbing plants and creepers, a fountain playing in the middle, orchids with clusters of flowers, ferns waving their fronds, and hummingbirds, and so on. So this is the great three-story mansion of Government House from the east, with the formal walk down the middle of the garden. And on the left is the gigantic cannonball tree. Now, the cannonball tree is an import from South America. It's a magnificent tree. And what seems to have been the case in Barbados was that Governor Seaforth in the early 19th century was collecting plants. And perhaps he was inspired by the governor's garden in St. Vincent, where Captain Cooke brought the first breadfruit tree into that garden. And a sucker of that first tree still exists there. So that Government House Gardens became the botanical gardens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the second half of the 18th century. And I think Lord Seaforth, the governor, was intent on doing much the same thing at Government House. But successive governors did not follow his pattern, so plant collectors did not continue to bring plants in, and we never did develop a botanical garden in those early days. The cannonball tree is worth another look. It produces its flowers and its fruit right from the main trunk. It's unique in this regard. And here is the beautiful flower, but in spite of being so beautiful, if you touch the petals, it falls apart. And there's the fruit, the gigantic fruit that looks very much like a rusty, large cannonball. Here is the formal part of the Government House gardens with the formal beds laid out, flowers for the dining table. And here's the grotto that was described. And the grotto would have had a fountain at one time. It has 3-foot thick walls on either side to support the trellis roof, but the trellis roof has long gone and just a few ferns remain. Another large tree in the gardens is the sandbox tree here, Cura hepitans. And This is a wonderful, very big tree, and there's another story attached to that. There's the little man walking in front to give you the sense of scale of this large 6-acre garden. Now let's talk about some other old plantation houses and old plantation gardens. Here, of course, is a red hibiscus present in almost every garden in Barbados. But this is a picture of the Erdiston Great House. The Erdiston Great House was the town house of a man called Sir Graham Briggs, and he was a collector of plants and everything else. So his town house, where he would have spent the evening if he came into town for a banquet, or he might have spent a weekend, this was his second house, as it were, but it had a very large garden with terraces, palms of every kind, fountains, pools, and so on. So here's an old photograph from 1900 of Erdiston Great House. And his main house was Farley Hill, built in 1860, or rather expanded from a smaller house in 1860. Now, Sir Graham was the host to all of the royal visitors in the second half of the 19th century. And for his prominent hospitality to these royal visitors and so on, he was made a baronet. His house, Farley Hill, became the Bellefontaine Mansion in the film of Alec Wall's Island in the Sun of 1953. And again, James Anthony Froude wrote about it in his book, and he described it as a palace with which Aladdin himself might have been satisfied, filled with rare and curious things. He collected everything from fossils and shells and works of art and plants. And so his garden was filled with exotic imports, including the very first Norfolk pine from the Norfolk Islands in Barbados. This is Farley Hill, a photo taken in 1964 after the fire which gutted it. When the filmmakers decided to redecorate Farley Hill, they brought a lot of timber in. They created a timber two-story veranda to make it look more like a Southern Belle mansion. And a few years afterwards, because the house had been abandoned, there was a fire which gutted it. So this is Farley Hill 60 years ago, and you can see that there's no vegetation inside of the house, but the trees, the sago palm on the left, the giant mahogany trees and cabbage palm are all there because the garden was still very prolific. And now, in 2022, this is the ruin of Farley Hill. Nothing has been done to restore it, and it is covered, it's festooned with a natural garden of vines and ferns and weeds, so we could call it the Farley Hill Natural Botanical Garden. This is a close-up of the ruin, and you can see how nature has taken over this magnificent coral stone mansion. Near to Farley Hill is another mansion, St. Nicholas Abbey, a Jacobean house built in 1659-60, according to an English house plan. So it has the typical Dutch curvilinear gables of the time, and it's surrounded by very tall and very large trees and a formal garden. So this is the formal garden with its paved walks and its arbors and so on. And of course, a 17th century house integrated with the house was a herb garden. So here is the herb garden of St. Nicholas Abbey, not really an abbey, the name is an affectation, but here is the herb garden maintained today as a herb garden and managed as a herb garden by my great-grandmother, because in the late 19th century, my great-grandfather was the manager of Nicholas Plantation, and she would have looked after the herbs at St. Nicholas Abbey Garden. Here is another old plantation house. This is Fustic House. It's the old plantation house restored and embellished by Oliver Messel, the very famous English theatre designer who spent the last 15 years of his life in Barbados, embellishing and redecorating and restoring old Barbadian homes. He did a wonderful job on Fustic. This was said to be his favorite, and it was the home of Robert Graves at the time. Now, the gardens I've mentioned because they are the largest private garden in Barbados, 11 acres in size and beautifully maintained by the present owner. It's opened every year for the National Trust. So when you come the next time, you can see the gardens of Fustic House. Wildy House, another old plantation house of around 1780s, is the headquarters of the Barbados National Trust, bequeathed to the trust. Now this is interesting because it has walled gardens and a carriage circle with a covered porch, and the fernery and the walled gardens are very much a part of the architecture of the house and its environment. The fernery is a showpiece right at the front entrance, and so here you see the covered porch with the fernery and the lattice walls right in front of it, and the walls that are everywhere. This is Wilde Great House, and next door, half a mile away, is my home, where more than I live. This is Upton House with a similar carriage circle, and the carriage circles were absolutely necessary, or regarded as necessary, ubiquitous in most of the old plantation houses. Let's move on to what I call the early 20th century public parks and gardens. They were not botanical gardens, but they were public spaces which were landscaped by a group called the Civic Circle of Ladies, led by Lady Gilbert Carter, who was the wife of the governor, Sir Gilbert Thomas Gilbert Carter. There are 4 sites that I mentioned: the Fountain Gardens in Trafalgar Square, now called Hero Square, the Esplanade on the bayfront of Carlisle Bay near to Bridgetown, Queen's Park in Bridgetown, and the Garrison, which was the garrison of the British Army while they were here. So here is the Fountain Gardens of Bridgetown, a 1905 photo by Walter Parkinson showing the beautiful spray of the water. And the Fountain Gardens were built to celebrate bringing water from the country at Codrington College into Bridgetown. You can see the large trees around it, palm trees, mahoganies, and evergreens. And here is a garden today. With urbanization, of course, there are rather less trees. You see the War Memorial on the left, which wasn't there then, and you see the clock tower. Recall this clock tower. You will see it again towards the end of the talk. That is the clock tower of the Parliament buildings. The second of these public spaces is the Esplanade. This is a long 250 strip of garden created along the main road in front of government headquarters, with cabbage palm trees all along the sidewalk, formal garden beds in the middle, and of course the beach on the far side, on the side of Carlisle Bay, which used to have as many as 200 ships in that famous bay, one of the 10 ships that made the British Empire great and rich. This is Queen's Park. Now, Queen's Park was laid out by Lady Gilbert Carter in 2009 after the British Army left Barbados. The site was the home of the general in charge of the British Army. By coincidence, in one of the low-lying areas of the park, near to the river, was this fabulous, huge baobab tree. And it would appear that a seed was probably washed across the Atlantic from Africa and washed up into the park. And this tree is known to be more than 300 years old because it was recorded in the great book by Griffith Hughes in 1750. So I am standing here filming a documentary with my colleague, Dr. Kerry Hall, right in front of the baobab tree in the center of the famous Queen's Park, which I describe these gardens as the lungs of Bridgetown. And the fourth of these public spaces is the Garrison. This huge open space became the racetrack. And just outside of the racetrack, which you can see on the bottom right of the picture, the Civic Circle planted several hundred mahogany trees, silk cotton trees, and ficus trees. On the left of this photo, you see one of the very large barrack buildings which encircles the garrison. Let's move on then to our modern public gardens. This is the famous jade vine of Andromeda Gardens. There are 6 of these public show gardens, all created in the second half of the 20th century. The first and the most wonderful of them, of course, is Andromeda Botanical Gardens, 1954, Welshman Hall, Cali, the Flower Forest, Hunt's Gardens, Orchid World, and the Petrea Gardens. Now, here in this photograph of Andromeda Botanical Gardens is Iris Bannicky. Andromeda is Iris's legacy. And you may well ask, well, why is it called Andromeda Gardens? It's a site which was her family property, 8 acres of steep hillside with huge rocky boulders punctuating the landscape. And Andromeda said this garden is tied to the hillside in the way that the Greek beauty Andromeda was chained to the hillside because her mother boasted about her beauty. So this is Iris sitting in the pool just after she began to landscape this site. This is Iris Baneke, and this is the beauty of Andromeda being rescued by Perseus, because Perseus had to rescue Andromeda against the monster Cetus that the gods had set to attack her, and Perseus claimed her. So Andromeda Gardens, named after the Greek beauty Andromeda, and here is this amazing fresco from the 1st century AD discovered in Pompeii. The Andromeda poster therefore features the famous jade vine, and on the left a heliconia in fluorescence, and on the right a similarly brilliant red ginger lily, flowers which are famous from Andromeda, famous at the flower forest, famous for export from Barbados, and a prominent feature of our Chelsea flower shows. Here are several of the heliconia inflorescences of the garden. And here is a landscape, a view of the garden looking downhill, one of the walks with a huge variety of plants in front of you. And here is the uphill path past the cactus garden with a horsetail on the left and a pandanus on the right, the scupine. Here is a cluster of shrubs and trees showing you the rich variety of trees, many local, some indigenous, some imported. You see cactus on the left and agaves in front of you. And here, of course, is the beautiful traveler's tree, which everyone loves and is a prominent feature wherever it exists in the local garden. And here is a mass of the very colorful bougainvillea, which thrives particularly well in the dry season between February and June. So it's all over. One of my favorite spots is the lily pond, and here is the bridge over the lily pond of Andromeda with the lilies and other water plants. And here is the lily pond with the papyrus on the left. I would like to introduce you to Sharon Cooke, who is the current director of the garden. And I think she is possibly the best of the directors that we have had over the years. She is doing a wonderful job at Andromeda. She had her training in Britain, and she's developing some wonderful things at the gardens today. I might mention at this point that there was an interim directing team for the garden, because when Iris Baneke died in 1988, she bequeathed the garden to the Barbados National Trust. And until we could advertise for and hire a competent gardener, the National Trust therefore arranged for me to chair a committee of horticulturists. So the two remaining grand dames of horticulture in Barbados, and Mr. George Money, a great gardener and director of the Barclays Bank, the three of them, myself and the director of the trust, went around the gardens every Monday morning to direct the staff. And so I learned a great deal in 6 months as chairman of the Andromeda Gardens Botanical Advisory Committee. That's Sharon Cooke. Moving on to Welshman Hall Gully. The gullies of Barbados intersect all of the hilly countryside. These are essentially old watercourses, and some of them are extremely deep. The Welshman Hall Gully is in the middle of the island, and it's a gully 100 feet deep from the cliff tops to the bottom of the gully. It therefore provides a darkish, damp, highly humid, warm environment, perfect for tropical plants. So it's the best part of Barbados for a tropical garden, and it's perhaps the only genuine tropical rainforest environment in the island. So here is the walk through the garden, and you can see the many palms and the rich vegetation, and another part of the walk with all these palms. There's a macaw palm with dreadful black spikes, and there are lots of trees with hanging roots, and a variety of trees that is very rich in Barbados. And a part of the population is the green monkey of Barbados. This is the African monkey imported during the slave trade of Barbados, and we have a few thousand of them. There's a resident troop of them in Welshman Hall Gully, and the director, the curator of Welshman Hall, Mrs. Branker, she very kindly hosts a banquet for them at 12 o'clock every day, where she lays out some bunches of bananas on a trestle table. and dozens of monkeys feast on it for the tourists to have a good time photographing these wonderful part of the Barbadian environment. Hunte's Gardens. The Hunte Gardens are also built or developed within a gully. This is a deep gully. This is a kind of inversion of a sugar loaf. It's a sort of circular gully with deep slopes, steep slopes, and many cabbage palm trees and royal palm trees growing out of the base of the gully. Anthony has carved paths around the gully and through the gully, and there are many tropical trees and plants, and it's a very colorful garden, as you can see here. There's a coppertache. The coppertaches were, as it were, evaporation basins used in the sugar factory for the sugar syrup to evaporate and crystallize the sugar. And so here you have the lotus growing in a coppertache at Hunte's Gardens. And here you have some of Anthony's statuary. I couldn't resist this picture, which shows a couple relaxing. He has some spots with a couple of chairs so that you can sit around and read and relax and enjoy the lovely environment and recover from your walk up and down the hillside. I couldn't resist this one of the colorful bromeliads that he has. Bromeliads are extremely colorful plants where the petals are almost as attractive as the gorgeous inflorescences, and he has a great collection of them along with many orchids. This is Anthony himself, and he is a part of the tour. He's a part of the attraction because he has a wonderful assortment of stories and he has a wonderful wit. So Anthony Hunte in the middle of Hunte's Gardens, close to the Andromeda Gardens. Another garden in Barbados is the orchid world. And this has hundreds of different orchids, local and imported. And it's interesting because it was designed within an old established, forgotten and disused quarry, a coral stone quarry, which provided shade and humidity and a certain degree of darkness for the orchids that are shade loving, as well as sunshine for those that like the sun, orchid world. And finally, we have the Patria Gardens on the west coast near the Platinum Coast of the wealthy lifestyle of the rich and famous. And this is the bridge over the water feature at the Patria Gardens. Let's return to my home, Upton House, of which I showed you a shot with the carriage circle. Here is the carriage circle in front of the house with the golden palms in front of it and a black willow tree to the left. Now, my garden is quite large, 2.5 acres, and so it's a bit like a Capability Brown garden with hills and valleys. So this is looking east across the valley with the hill on the left, and you can see the brown grass because this photo was taken to show you that we have a dry season in Barbados between February and the end of May. We have 4 to 5 months of comparative drought, and so most gardeners have got to learn to plant xerophytic plants so that they can tolerate the drought and still have some color. Of course, the flowering of most of our flowering plants does occur at the beginning of that dry season. So the Horticultural Society has its horticultural shows in January and February. So those who want to visit to see the flowers come in January or February. In the middle of this picture is a very, very large flamboyant tree. The flowers are about to come out, and when they do come out, they are covered, absolutely covered in large red flowers with a touch of yellow. This is a neighbor's flamboyant tree, and you can see it completely covers the branches with red flowers. It's an absolutely gorgeous sight, and they are all over the island. Looking west across my valley, up the other hill, we see the boughs of a large mahogany tree at the top left, and we see a large tree in the distance, which is the bearded fig tree. Now, the mahogany trees came into Barbados. It is thought a few came around the 1760s because it has been mentioned in 1765, but most seem to have come after the 1780 Great Hurricane. It's a very large tree when it grows to full height, and I think mine, with an 8-foot diameter, is one of the very largest anywhere, with a height of just over 100 feet. The mahogany wood was a very much prized wood by English cabinet makers Sharon and Chippendale, and it still is one of the finest woods for furniture. Here, on the other hand, at the top of the hill is the bearded fig tree. This is an enormous tree, and it puts down hanging roots. So It is thought that it gave its name to the name of Barbados, the bearded ones, bearded fig trees, bearded trees, and the hanging roots become woody when they reach the ground and form multiple trunks. So my bearded fig tree covers 1/4 of an acre, and there are bearded fig trees in botanical gardens in India which cover more than an acre of extended trunks of one single living organism. The bearded fig tree is the national tree of Barbados, and it is on our coat of arms. Now, it is regarded as a spiritual tree in many parts of the Far East, the ficus tree. So it's the first spiritual tree I'm going to mention. Here is another ficus, a Ficus benjamina, on the other side of my garden. It has hanging roots too, but it's a rather more delicate tree with smaller leaves and golden berries. And here is another tree of great significance, the silk cotton tree. You can see the large trunk of this comparatively slender tree, which is only 40 years old, but a very large trunk, and it tends to have a big trunk covered with prickles. But the important point about the silk cotton tree, the Kapok, is its fruit, because the fruit, very small seeds surrounded by a great ball of cotton. And that great ball of cotton, when a tree covered in cotton balls, when they all fall, then the ground around looks like it's covered with snow. And those cotton balls were used in colonial days to fill mattresses, pillows, and cushions. So it was economically a very valuable tree, as well as being a shade tree. And here is the baobab tree. Now, the silk cotton tree has spiritual aspects in South America among the indigenous tribes there, while the baobab tree that I'm showing you now in another corner of my garden has a spiritual reputation in Africa. And this is a young baobab. You can see that this has a diameter of only 3.5 feet at this time, at the age of 41 years. And it sheds all of its leaves for half of the year, and it produces a fruit from which people make a drink. But when it's very mature, like the baobab I showed you in Queen's Park, 300 years old, with a 80, 90-foot circumference, the old trees tend to rot in the center and literally produce a tank. And in many villages across Western Africa, where there are long-standing droughts, those baobab tree tanks provide water which lasts for many weeks after the rainy season has stopped. So you have 3 spiritual trees, all 3 in my garden, magnificent trees. Another interesting feature of my garden is the traditional Victorian fernery. Now, when ferns became popular in Britain in the middle of the 19th century, the early Victorian era, it was said that gardeners there had fern fever, and everyone had a fernery. But it was a hot house, a glass house, in order to provide the combination of warmer tropical temperatures and humidity. In the Caribbean, of course, in the tropics, you didn't need a glass house. What you needed was a shade house, and you wanted high humidity. So the shade house would give shade while you had warmth, and the humidity was increased in some ferneries, and mine is the best example of this, where you go down 4 or 5 steps, and the base of the fernery is 4 feet below the surface of the ground, which means that your shelves of coral stone blocks on either side are all much more humid. So you have the warmth, you have the shade, and you have the humidity for your ferns. And this is really a very fine fernery. There are only 3 surviving complete ferneries left from the many dozens or scores of ferneries that you would have had in Barbados in the old days. So ferns on the inside, philodendron plants you can see on the outside here of my fernery, and inside you see hanging baskets of Bostonia and breadfruit and other ferns and other shade-loving plants. And to the south of my garden, we have a palm garden. We have about half a dozen different variety of palms, not as many as at Codrington College. We have the Bismarck palm on the left. This is a wonderful giant palm known as the Bismarck, Bismarcus nobilis silver, with a rather silvery leaf. And then in the middle here, you have the Barbados thatch palm. Both of these have palmate leaves, and this is called the thatch palm because this leaf, which is about 3 feet across, is used or was used to thatch the houses in the old days when most of the slaves were forced to live in wattle and daub huts with thatching of thatch palms, and the indentured servants, the poor white population in the north, the former prisoners, political prisoners from Britain, their huts were thatched with these thatch palm leaves. And then on the far right, you have a more delicate frond-like leaf of the MacArthur palm. So that's the palm garden. Another interesting feature is the cat's claw vine. This produces something that is called the golden shower. For 3 to 4 days of the year, in the first week of April, every one of these vines across Barbados bears simultaneously these gorgeous yellow flowers, which hang on the vine for about 4 days and then produce a yellow carpet. And many of them are planted around mill walls. So here's a mill wall with a cat's claw vine on it, and it will, in the first week of April, be completely covered with yellow. Bougainvillea, of course, on the right, a mahogany tree on the left, and another mahogany there. So that's the cat's claw. Now, another specialty in my garden, one of my favorites, next to the horsehair on the right, is the Schomburgia orchid. This has been renamed, but it's still a lovely orchid flower, and it's named after the brother of the historian Sir Robert Schomburgk, Sir Richard Schomburgk. He was another brilliant man who was a botanist and an explorer. Now, let's move on to hotels. A number of hotels in Barbados have really developed fabulous gardens. They've recognized that visitors from up north are fascinated by tropical flowers and plants. And this is one of my favorite hotels, the Sugar Bay Hotel on the south coast. You can see that the entrance is a little avenue of beautiful palms. There are a variety of palms here, golden palms, MacArthur palms, and thatch palms. And that's the entrance to the Sugar Bay Hotel. Here is a garden feature with 2 lovely little lily ponds, and again, a variety of plants, some of the large cabbage palms on your right, hibiscus plants on the right. And here is the very lovely pagoda in the middle of the garden, surrounded by ferns, ferns growing on the trees, ferns growing in garden beds, ferns growing in pots. So it's a wonderful environment at the Sugar Bay Hotel. Another hotel, the Cobbler's Cove Hotel, has also got wonderful gardens, which are sometimes used for tours of Barbados. My own favorite resort, the Crane Hotel, with many garden sites, has multiple gardens, and this is my watercolor painting of one of the many garden sites at the Crane Resort on the east coast of Barbados. Moving to a very different kind of garden, it's the village garden of the chattel houses. After emancipation, the freed slaves were often obliged to remove from one plantation to another, and they had a very inventive, creative way of accommodating their domestic life. They built wooden houses which could be readily removed in a single day. Here is a chattel house of the traditional style, built of timber, with 45-degree gable roofs which deflect the winds and hurricanes and survive hurricanes when other houses are demolished. And it's surrounded by a little front garden surrounded with a picket fence, and a garden along the side with its crotons and its bougainvilleas and its gardenia and other shrubs. So it's a very typical, beautiful, small village garden or chattel house garden. And then there are Barbados tropical gardens in other places, even in the Carolinas. You may not know, but the Barbadians settled the Carolinas in the year 1670. And one of the leading families of the Carolinas owns this plantation, Magnolia, which is a 400-acre garden, the Magnolia Gardens, owned by the Drayton family. The 9th generation Drayton, who manages it now, but his father, the 8th generation Drayton Hastings, he arranged on coming to Barbados and meeting one of our great gardeners, Jean Robinson, agreed to establish a Barbados garden at the Magnolia Garden. So close to the great house of Magnolia here, is a garden called the Barbados Tropical Garden. And it's a large glass house which Jean Robinson designed with the help of the Magnolia manager and one or two of her friends. And it is filled with tropical plants imported from Barbados. The Barbados Tropical Garden in Charleston, South Carolina. Moving on to the planned National Botanical Garden of Barbados. This was planned a little over 20 years ago, and the idea was to convert an unused, abandoned sugar plantation called Codrington, which was owned by the brother of Codrington, the benefactor of Codrington College. You see here a 10-foot wall surrounding the plantation yard site and the great house of Codrington Mansion, the Blue House. Now, that site is the site of the National Conservation Commission, the government entity which manages the gardens and parks of Barbados. But outside of the wall are the land's 247 acres of the former sugar plantation. And it has been decided that that will become a botanical garden. Large trees are now there. They've been planted over the last 25 years. So it's now really an arboretum, and it's used very much as a walking and recreation park. Many events are held there in the public space in this current arboretum, but plans are being made for a formal, proper botanical garden. And in this area where you can see in the middle distance a declivity, it's a low-lying area which becomes a pond after every rainy season. There are banana trees planted on the edge of it, and that will become a water garden. You can see the size of the garden. It's going to accommodate the gardens planned by our garden planner, Diane Clark, a water garden, a xerophyte garden, a rooftop garden in Andromeda, a sensory perfume, mindfulness and wellness garden, where people will hopefully enjoy the benefits of the garden and restore their mental health and well-being. A woodland garden and gully. There is a natural gully within the 247 acres, and so that promises to be one of the attractive parts. I want to finish with the story of the Barbados Horticultural Society. Here is the mill wall on the site of the Horticultural Society premises. The society was started in 1925, and it's been operating therefore for almost a century. And about 45 years ago, it bought the old plantation yard site with a mill wall of the Balls plantation. And here is the abandoned mill wall, which it still has doors and other features with a bell at the top. And across the lawns from the mill wall are the old sugar factory buildings, and they're used for the annual horticultural show and for the fairs and for the garden sales that take place at Balls. There's another 11 acres that they have bought alongside to develop an arboretum, which we look forward to. But meanwhile, the Barbados Horticultural Society is famous for its teamwork and the products of that teamwork. It's an amazing story, because they have been exhibiting at the Chelsea Flower Show, the greatest flower show on earth, over the last 35 years, beginning in 1988 until 2022. They have won over those 35 years in every year that they have exhibited a total of 20 gold medals, the runner-up to the gold medal, the 12 silver medals, and the 1 silver medal, winning medals year after year with magnificent displays. Now, what they do is the team gets together. It's an amazing team of workers, dozens of people hard at work. They collect plants, wonderful flowering plants that will last for 10 days, the ginger lilies, the heliconias, the anthuriums, and all the foliage. They bring it all together at the Balls headquarters, and they pack it up very carefully. It's shipped out compliments of Virgin Airways. And when it arrives in London, there's a team that goes there, led by my publishers, Keith and Sally Miller, and Jenny Weech, who is the coordinator of the whole exercise. And she's a magnificent gardener too. And they set up themes that look like this. And this year's theme is Come Relax in Barbados. So it is a riot of color within this space provided. You can see the orchids, you can see the heliconias, you can see the ginger lilies, the anthuriums, and the gorgeous foliage. And right in the middle at the top of the picture, you see a green object. I wonder what that green object is. Well, it's actually a hammock. It's a hammock that's been plaited with the fronds of the coconut palm tree. There's an artisan in St. Philip who works out at the Crane Beach, who has plaited this magnificent hammock with the fronds from the coconut palm. And the hammock has been decorated, of course, with other flowers and foliage, these lovely little yellow flowers, and it's hanging between two coconut palm trees. So that's just the kind of hammock you can come to Barbados and relax on the beach. And I mentioned the beach. The hammock, of course, is hanging over sand that's been brought from Barbados, the white sands of Barbados, with two young coconut trees here, and with some yellow coconuts there, which you can cut and get some coconut water when you're lying in your hammock, and you can drink the coconut water or a rum punch. So that's this year's Come Relax in Barbados display by the Barbados Horticultural Society of Chelsea. And I can only say that after 2 years of no Chelsea, the other displays must have been fantastic, that we were given the runner-up silver gilt medal and not the gold medal, which we've got on other occasions, such as now with this slide, the historic Bridgetown and its garrison, celebrating the UNESCO inscription of historic Bridgetown and its garrison as a World Heritage Site. When I showed you the Fountain Gardens, I pointed out the clock tower of the Parliament buildings in the background. So this model clock tower was used as the center of the display with the usual heliconias, ginger lilies, and all the other wonderful flowers from Barbados. I want to finish with this shot. This is Glendale, and it's the beautiful, colorful, small garden of Audrey Thomas, the last of the great grand dames of Barbadian horticulture, because Audrey celebrated her centenary last month, aged 100 years. This is Audrey's garden, and therefore we've come full circle with our talk, because it demonstrates what combining a life with nature and working in a garden does for your physical, your spiritual, and your mental health to produce centenarians like the famous Audrey Thomas. So I can only end by saying, come to Barbados and enjoy these gorgeous gardens in Barbados, the paradise with everything, especially magnificent gardens. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Do you want to stop sharing so we can see everyone?
Right. Okay.
Right. Thank you very much. That absolutely splendid talk. And of course, you've rather encouraged us to travel to Barbados again, all of us. We want to see these gardens ourselves. And I don't think any of us would have time, even a whole month there, to be able to visit every one of them. So our holidays will need to be long indeed. There have been a few questions which have popped up on the chat line as we've been going through. And the first was from Alessandra Cummins, and she's going to ask her question, which I think is a personal one, about the work at St. Nicholas Abbey.
Yes.
Alessandra, are you still with us? I'll unmute you. Well, perhaps I shall ask the question if she can't be unmuted so quickly. Okay. What she did ask is, what was the name of your great-grandmother who planted the herb garden? And I was going to supplement that by saying, did she work anywhere else too with things that we can see today?
No, I think her husband spent almost his entire career at Nicholas Abbey. So, and I doubt very much that she would have planted the herb garden, but would probably have continued a tradition. And she was a dean. My grandfather was called Thaddeus Dean. His nickname was Bush Dean because he had a beard 2 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the only garden she would have managed.
Yeah, sorry about that, but something went wrong with the sound on my thing. Thank you very much for asking the question for me, Henry. I just wanted to have her name present in that wonderful talk, because as often happens, women's names are missing in action. So thank you very much for giving us.
Yes, well, I think, speaking off the top of my head, her name was Margaret Graham Dean, but I will double check that from the family history, from the family tree, and I will let you know. But I think she was Margaret Graham Dean.
Thank you very much.
I had another question, which was from Anne Harding, and she asked, were there any collections of indigenous Barbados plants forming their own gardens, or places where they could be collectively seen?
I don't think that that has been done with a specific group, if you see what I mean, at Andromeda, but they are all at Andromeda. And what Sharon Cooke is doing at Andromeda is currently creating a botanical collection of theoretically useful medicinal plants. In other words, plants that have a reputation for medicinal uses, whether they've been shown to be of any value or not. But the traditional medicinal plants of Barbados that go down very well with the old wives, you know, the old wives' tale that this is good for that and this is good for the other. She's doing that with traditional medicinal plants of a reputation. But I can't say that anyone has brought them together in a specific small area.
Okay. Well, other people have commented that there has been a volume published by Sonia Peter, Seed Under the Leaf, and there's a link in the chat line to it for people who want to follow that up. I had a further question from Luke Delmas in London, who asks, where are the two other surviving ferneries in the island, which you don't own yourself?
The two other surviving ferneries are interesting. The other one that I mentioned and showed a picture of is the one at Wilby House itself, where the fernery is right in front of the covered porch. So that I showed in my talk, as well as my Upton fernery. The third one is at a place called Francia in St. George. And Francia is a magnificent house with gorgeous gardens. And that has the largest of the three surviving ferneries. And it's actually the site of a school now. It's called the Providence School, funded by a wealthy Canadian who owned a hockey team, a house on the East Coast where you saw Alessandra speaking from the East Coast cliffs just now. And the man who owned a property up there owned this school at Francia. So Francia is a large plantation house in the middle of the island.
That sounds good. Now, I had a question as well, so I'm going to allow myself to ask it, which is, you mentioned the Norfolk pine, presumably from Norfolk here in the UK. And I wondered whether there are actually any larger or other collections of temperate plants within a tropical botanic garden.
Well, remember, it's a Norfolk pine from the Norfolk Islands, southern hemisphere.
Oh, sorry.
From the Norfolk Islands, southern hemisphere. Well, there are a number of people have planted other types of conifers. They're not terribly common. I remember at my school, there was a conifer. I never ever knew the name, but at my school garden, there was a conifer, and I think people do have a number of other firs and pines, but they're not terribly common.
Oh, well. Right. Well, I think that covers the questions which have been sent in, and there's been a great number of comments of appreciation, particularly the hammock. I think people are rather tempted by the hammock.
Yes.
And also by the prospect of a rum punch with that lovely coconut water in it. And I wondered if there are any other questions just in the next moment, or if anyone thinks I've forgotten to ask one on their behalf, they can please put it in the chat line straight away.
No, I didn't.
No.
Let me just clarify, Francis.
Yes.
The rum punch, the correct, traditional, authentic rum punch doesn't have coconut water. It's coconut water or rum punch. Now, if you want rum in your coconut water, because the density of rum, of alcohol, is lower than that of water, people tend to drink what is called a coconut water rum float. And they pour a good measure of rum on top of the coconut water. But the rum punch is made with lime juice, sugar syrup, and rum. And Angostura bitters with a dash of nutmeg on top. So that's the rum punch, not with coconut water. Coconut water, rum float, or rum punch made with lime juice. And I have to tell you, you know, you've got to come to Barbados again for the rum punch.
I'm in no doubt of that whatever, and I think that many people listening in will agree with me wholeheartedly when they say they're looking forward to such an opportunity very soon indeed. And those of you who are lucky enough already to be in Barbados, do please have a rum punch on my behalf and those as other people sending wishes from here. I have got two more messages which have just come in. So they ask, Anne Harding asks, do you have a particularly favorite plant overall in Barbados?
A particularly favorite plant?
Mhm.
Well, that's hard to tell. I have so many favorites.
Mm.
You know, you can't ask somebody who has 10 children, which is your favorite child? Every one is your favorite. Now, one of my favorites is my bearded fig tree, but my wife keeps telling me that it should be cut down because it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. You see, the bearded fig tree spreads out, the hanging roots come down, and they become woody trunks. So they become bigger and bigger and bigger, you see. So my wife is afraid that the bearded fig tree is going to invade the house, and then we'll have to move out. But that's one of my favorites.
Okay, so you're planning a race against the fig tree, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Right, well, I think it's time now to say thank you very much. There's now further chats of people confirming rum punches, including, in fact, Peregrine Bryant, who remembers having shared them with you
Thank you,
before,
Peregrine.
and that they're both delicious and lethal. So
I might mention, Francis, Alvin Holder is saying thanks. And I just mentioned the density of the alcohol, which made the rum float on top of the coconut water, because my friend, the professor of chemistry, Alvin, was sitting in on it. So I knew that he would want me to say something that was scientific.
he also confirms that you make a great rum punch, actually. He's not waiting for any further. Yeah, here he is. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Sandy, we have to say thank you very much indeed for both entertaining and an informative talk, and one which, as I said before, does tempt all of us to want to return to the Caribbean again in order to see these things, or perhaps to visit for the first time for those who've not had the good fortune to go before. We do have one more talk, and this is going back to housekeeping. We have another talk next week, which is available through our website and through the Eventbrite, where the bookings can be made. Rachel Tranter has put it in the chat line for people to find. And so I look forward to the prospect to see many of you again soon. It's on post-colonial landscapes of Africa and Asia, and Anthony Wayne will be giving us that presentation. So thank you very much, and see you all again soon. And for those of you who would like to support what we do, please do join the Commonwealth Heritage Foundation. Details of that too are on our website. And just by the way, the time of the next presentation is our usual 5 to 6 p.m. slot on Wednesday, 22nd of June. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. We shall very much indeed.